Ready? Somebody got a minute. Good afternoon. This is Commissioner Linker. Welcome to day one of our advisor debriefing. It's Thursday, January 16th. We will begin with our ethics statement. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any members of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of this meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in the discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Dr. Fair, if you can take roll call.
Okay. Commissioner Jody Ray Autry.
Commissioner Autry present.
Commissioner Catherine Bailey. Commissioner Ricky Baldwin.
Commissioner Baldwin present.
Commissioner Marlena Blue.
Commissioner Blue present.
Commissioner William Cheshire. Commissioner Aubrey Gadet.
Commissioner Gadet present.
Commissioner Kathleen Linker.
Commissioner Linker present.
Commissioner Susan Mills. Commissioner Rob Oral. Commissioner Alicia Ray.
Commissioner Ray present.
And Commissioner Lindsay Seitz. So you have established quorum.
Commissioner Linker speaking, so welcome everyone. We're going to start a debriefing. This afternoon, we're going to start with the advisors who reviewed founding principles of the United States of America and North Carolina civics literacy. And we will start with the first bid, which is a HMH 7102, Huden, Mifflin, Harcourt. At this time, if one of the advisors, we will entertain any strengths that you noted. HMH 7102. Founding principles is the course, HMH.
They are unmuted themselves from that. I see some hands being raised for two. It was Tony Gillum and Amy Cross
Okay.
that both had their hands
Okay.
raised.
And Amy Cross.
Realize that you have to give me control to unmute myself. And that's what I was doing. I didn't know if the other people had the same situation, that they weren't speaking because they were still muted.
I got it fixed now.
Okay. So you want me to unmute everyone
Yes.
and tell them to mute themselves back? I don't see where I can unmute everybody, so I see a mute all, but not unmute.
This is Commissioner Linker. To the advisors, we are going to unmute you, and then you would control your mute on your end.
You want me to go forward with the 102, 7102?
7102, yes.
Yes, okay. Strengths would be an easy to read textbook for what would be considered kind of a lower to mid-level reading. concerns with the text is that it doesn't appear to be really aligned with the new standards, more with the old standards. All of the examples for marginal groups, discrimination, diversity are not recent. And so there's not a lot of discussion on social, more recent social movements.
Any other comments for strengths? You can unmute yourself and speak. Okay, moving on to areas of concern. I know we had some areas of concern just now as well. Anything else to add for areas of concern?
You ask them to raise their hand if you're trying to unmute and can't.
They still can't unmute themselves.
Okay. Okay, you all are seeing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unmute all. First thing.
We make them a panelist.
If you want.
Yeah, just make them a panelist. I recognize every name on there.
Okay, so we're good.
Do you guys recognize every name on there?
Yes.
Okay, let's see if I can do that globally.
Commissioner, with that, I think Dawn was probably wanting to say something. She was in the other one that evaluated that text. And,
Okay, hold on a second. Let me, I was just checking to see if there's a global way to make everybody a panelist without having to go one by one. Who was the other person? Dawn? Is that the one? Do you want to make them all panelists?
she's good.
Yes.
Jessica Rose,
Something's happening with Emily.
Jonathan is,
He's one, yeah.
We may have,
Sarah is, I don't know.
What opinion may be EC or EL?
mm,
Yeah, Lori is easier.
Sally's EC.
Tim Holly, Tony Gilman, Jessica Real is as well.
And Michelle Muir is.
mm, I don't know. Okay. Let's keep trying. What did you say about Emily?
Yes, she's good. Jessica. Michelle.
Hmm,
Well, I'll let some of them.
maybe there's a. I'm not sure. It's not letting me make these last four. I'll keep working on it though.
Okay.
Do any of these want to talk now?
Is the other person that you think?
Yeah, Dawn is, this commissioner, that Dawn is up there. So
Mhm.
I'm sure they get to unmute and stuff.
Mm.
This is Commissioner Linker. Dawn, are you able to unmute yourself? We moved you to a panelist.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you like to make any comments? I know you had your hand up.
I did.
I think so.
She evaluated this text.
Okay. All right, if we have no comments for 7102, 7103 is the next.
Yeah, I reviewed that text. You can hear me.
I sure can.
Again, with what my other panelists said, it's easy to read, it's accessible. I don't know whether we can address technology implications in the sense that it's really hard to access the text. Also reflecting what my previous panelists said, it deals with most issues of minorities within the context of civil rights. And it also doesn't deal with North Carolina in its specifics. It has a very generic and abstract approach to state and local issues. So those are both the positives and my concerns about it.
And that takes us to Social Studies School Services, SSS 7126. Feel free to talk about any strengths that you might have. Hang on one second, let me preface that with, this is the one, they're all the same, it's just the contracts, right? SSS, all right. So as a caveat, before we talk about this, the next, the submissions from Social Studies School Services all reflect the same content. The only difference is the license for the term. So the comments would be the same for each of the 7126, 7127, 7128, and 7129. So if you reviewed 7126, would like to make a comment of one area of strength.
One of the strengths are the teacher resources. I think it's a well-developed teacher resource book. It provides a lot of applications, a lot of different kinds of ways to use the text. I think there is a disparity between the teacher resources and the student resources, and that's one of the problems with it.
I'll add to that is a much more updated resource than some of the others. Do you want me to go ahead to the concern?
Yeah. Yes, that would be great.
My main concern again is like a couple of the others, there's no direct tie-in to North Carolina. There's no mention in North Carolina. It mentions state governments, local governments, but nothing about North Carolina and the North Carolina Constitution.
Moving on to SSS 7127, if there would be anything different that you've already said for 7126. If not, we're going to move on to 7128. Again, it's the same content as 7126. Is there anything different anyone would like to add? And lastly, 7129, again, this is the same content as 7126. Okay, and so that brings us to the Savas Learning Company SBL 7107 submission. Would you like to share some strengths that you found in your review?
The multiplicity of resources, there are just so many resources that are really helpful. I think of a lot of the books, it comes the closest to meeting the standards criteria. I had it at well above 80%. And I think that it also addresses multiple intelligence, multiple different learning styles, and just the vast variety of resources make it a very valuable asset.
I would add that it's very user-friendly. The graphics are great. It's just very engaging. It's engaging on in the teacher edition, and as much so with the student edition.
I agree with Patrick and Ann from the EC aspect. It addresses the multiple intelligences and a lot of differentiated learning, and it is a very engaging book.
Are there any areas of concern that you would like to share?
It does not do North Carolina very well. It takes a very generic approach to the issue of state and local politics and has no specificity to North Carolina.
And that includes the submissions for founding principles. Next, we will talk about your findings for econ and personal finance. Econ and personal finance, starting with EDL 7100, E-Dynamic Learning.
Okay. Let me pull that up. For the criteria review, it only met about 61% of the standards. In looking at it, it is designed more towards personal finance, and it did well with those concepts. However, because this is a combined economics and personal finance course, it was really lacking in a lot of the economic standards. So it did not pass, again, because it was apparently designed specifically for personal finance. And, you know, they did try to put in some of the economic standards as far as what their content base was, but it just didn't meet those economic standards.
This is Commissioner Linker. For those of you that have viewed it through the EC and the EL lens, feel free to also to add strengths and weaknesses that you found as well. Do we have any specific areas of concern for EDL 7100 that haven't not already been stated? Then we'll move on to EDL 7101. Again, this is the knowledge matters, dynamic learning.
This was a companion piece that went with the 7100, and I was not able. It was actually a game. A role simulation, almost, it looked a little bit like SimCity, where you were supposed to be able to go in and, you know, get a job, get a house, do the everyday things, and you were supposed to build your wealth to a specific point, having a lot of choices along the way. And I was able to get in and take a look at the tutorial for it, and the tutorial was well done, you know, to be able to guide you through doing the game. However, all of the units to actually go through the simulations, none of them were activated by the instructor, so I could not get in to review it.
Are there any other comments for EDL 7101? The next course would be Goodhart Wilcoy GWP 7100, Foundations of Financial Literacy. Any strengths that you noted?
This particular source met 95% of the standards. It was designed so that you could use it as a complete pencil paper, traditional classroom setting, or you could upload documentation to a platform if you wanted to do that. The only place that I saw it lacking, I'm trying to look for my one. My goodness, I can't find it. The only thing that I saw it lacking was identifying cost of post-secondary education. So that was the only thing that I really saw lacking from that. It was very easy to use. I did like the different formats that it was able to utilize. It also has the ability to be used and have things uploaded into multiple platforms. Oh, I can't see. Oh, on mine, it did not save the accessibility piece. I was trying to look back at my notes, but it did not save that piece for me. The authors and reviewers ranged from classroom teachers to bank loan officers to financial planners. So it was well reviewed in a lot of different areas. There's ability for creating portfolios, working as teams, doing extra activities if you have your more advanced students get through and complete. But one of the things that I really liked about it was that it did have specific sections, sort of themes that they tried to continue throughout the resource on employable skills, career exploration, and also ethics pieces. So I thought that was really interesting. And I've not really seen that before in another resource. So when they put them in different content areas, they ask them ethical questions about that content.
Next, we will look at Social Studies School Services Submission SSS 7130, which will also be the same as 7131, SSS 7132, and SSS 7133. Any strengths on that resource?
Let me take a look. I really felt that this particular resource would have been a strong resource, maybe at a lower age level or for ESL students, because the content in the digital platform is very simple. The lessons are not particularly long or particularly in depth. So if you had, depending on their classification, a student who maybe has an IEP for reading comprehension might be a great utilizing, source to utilize for them, or again for ESL. So I thought that was a strength of this particular one. But for high school level, I just felt that it really did not get into the depth of information that would be beneficial for students. A lot of things were pretty surface level. And so as far as advanced engagement, a lot of the activities were very, very simple. It might have been 5 multiple choice questions, or it might have had you put a discussion question together. And so there weren't a whole lot of teacher resources that were that I would want to, that I could use as far as differentiated instruction. A lot of the materials were very much the same.
Thank you. The next bid we'll look at is Savas Learning SVL 7110.
Okay. For this particular resource, it is sort of the opposite of the first resource that I looked at. This particular resource would be good as far as the economic standards are concerned. The economic pieces I thought were very well done, but it did not meet the 80% because the content for the personal finance standards was very brief. At the beginning of the source, or at the beginning of the resource as far as student textbook, I think the personal finance section was about 40 pages long. And so it's really hard to, get all of our personal finance standards into about 40 pages. So a lot of the personal finance was, again, very surface level, not really in-depth enough for understanding, but the economic portion of it was very well done.
Are there any other specific areas of strength or concern on this submission?
I did not think it allowed for the differentiation between the different cognitive levels. I did note that it does have the read aloud option, and it also translates into several different languages. You can translate the text.
That concludes the economics and personal finance submissions. We will now look at American history. Starting with Cengage Learning CGL 7103. Any strengths noted?
The Cengage book is a very pretty resource. Because it partners with National Geographic, there are lots of very colorful images and maps. And it's also interesting that they profile some of the people who work for Nat Geo to kind of learn more about explorers, photographers, historians, archaeologists, and explore history kind of like what it looks like in the real world, which was interesting that you don't always see.
I like the fact on this one that it had the audio embedded in different areas on the page. So it had audio embedded into maybe a photograph or even into the captions. So there was a lot of options there for varied cognitive levels.
I'd like to piggyback off of that. From an EL perspective, there were several features that were very useful, such as there was a little toggle that could change the level of the text to expose the students to a rigorous text, but also to provide some support if they needed to read one beforehand as a pre-reading. There was also options for videos. They had a video library, American Stories library, biography libraries, where students could access extra resources to support that building of background knowledge.
Any areas of concern for CGL 7103?
Yes, there's a major area of concern because it focuses on 1877 onward. It has some resources and information about American history prior to that, but it's a lot of very, very surface level information, facts that are literally bullet pointed under the term key takeaways. So it does not get into the depth of knowledge required by our standards for most things prior to 1877. There's a lot of issues with it covering everything before 1877 and being able to chart that change over time just because it's literally not in this book. And because of that, it does not do a good job meeting the standards or what was required by the General Assembly in that founding principles legislation that is also in the American history curriculum, because it's just literally not in depth in this book.
I also have some concerns about some of the EC and EL things that are wonderful, like they said, the embedded text. But when you have one speech box for an entire timeline and it does not light up what it's talking about, it's very hard to follow. And it would be easy for our children to get lost in just the rambling. There really was no speak save feature for like think about it questions. And I liked the toggle switch where it would go back and forth between the rigorous and reading and the more accessible reading. However, when you have the speech button employed at the top of that page, even if the toggle switch has been moved, it will use the rigorous text even when it goes over that leveled reader, which is very confusing for our kids. Let me think. And some areas would highlight when it was reading and some areas wouldn't. So it was just kind of, it wasn't comprehensive throughout the whole text. So
The next session we will discuss is Exploros Incorporated EXP 7102. Any strengths that you would like to share with the commission?
This was interesting because it's ready formatted lessons that you deploy that is very much workable in a virtual setting or hybrid setting. And it's set up using the 5E lesson strategy. So there's always an engage, an explore, etc. And it's very interactive for the students, but there's not a lot of pick and choose what you want. It's here's the next lesson is what it feels like. You can assign some things and pick, but it very much feels like this is a prepackaged curriculum. Here, do this in this order. The other thing to note, and I don't know if this will be a positive or negative, and it probably depends on who you are, is that the Exploros does not have lots of detailed articles on their own and doesn't have lots of detailed information within their platform. Instead, they link you to articles that are online. I found lots of articles from ushistory.com, digital history, the History Channel website, Khan Academy. They would go to such places like Mount Vernon and Monticello to get resources, maybe relating to Mount Vernon and George Washington. And they would always have a single summary simplified version. But all of the materials that I saw and clicked on, which admittedly was not everything, were things that were already freely available online that I can access without this subscription service.
are we on positive still or negatives now?
We can move to areas of concern.
This one was not one that I felt like I had a hard time finding assessments, and when I did find them, I did not see how there was not a lot of modification capability past the summaries that were offered at the lower reading level. There were no speech buttons. There were no speak to save function. There was no speech to text option for written exercises. There was a variety of materials, but again, I couldn't see that the assessments and the opportunities for students creatively or critically within our ECEL population. I had a hard time finding the options that we were looking for. Now, the vocabulary was covered really well. But again, there was a lot of things that I was specifically looking for our specific populations that just weren't there. I just felt like it could be much more comprehensive if they would put those speech accessible things in there for our children. because, you know, if our students can't access the information, they are going to get frustrated and just stop. They won't even try. So
I noted that they mentioned in the tutorial video that you had the ability to differentiate instruction, but I could not find within the objectives drop down, I could not find where you differentiated, like was previously said.
Thank you. The next submission we'll look at is Houghton Mifflin Harcourt's HMH 7104. Strengths that you'd like to note?
This one is a more traditional textbook and digital resources that it has a more traditional textbook and has the digital resources. So it could be just bought digitally or as a textbook, depending upon what the county wanted. It did meet all of the standards, or 80% of the standards. It did meet our threshold. The interesting thing, and this is probably because this company has been around for a while, some of these things looked familiar, like I'd seen them in other places, but had been updated. They have a ton of extra resources. And there are digital versions of things and PDF versions of things there. I'm sure the EC and ELD reviewers are going to mention this, but there was Spanish editions and guided reading workbooks in here. The interesting thing with this one, though, and they mentioned this in our tutorial video, was they did not give us access to their entire digital site because for whatever reason, but that meant that I can't judge all of the accessibility pieces. I can't judge how it would work digitally beyond looking at the textbook, the student version, which allowed students to take notes right there, but it was at a little awkward format at the very bottom of the screen. But it is a very pretty book. And has like the traditional teacher kind of textbook with information, and the digital teacher book also has like the how to teach it things as well.
Any areas of concern that haven't already been mentioned?
it's not a concern at all. I really liked the HMH. Maybe it's because I have seen and used HMH before, but this digital student book encouraged the students to be independently self-engaging by having the graphic organizers embedded right next to the text, and it would just pop up and they could fill it in as they went along. Speech to text box would have been nice in that little area, but everything was there. But you know, other than now, on the online assessment, the speech button would read the question but not the answer choices, and for, you know, I guess encouraging successfulness on the test, we really need to make sure there's nothing that's going to cause the children not to be able to be successful. So if they could do that, that would be great.
The next bid for submission discussion is the social studies school services. As the set trend previously, we have 4 bid numbers. They are the same thing. It's just a change of the license of the contract. So we will talk about SSS 7122, but the comments that we make for SSS 7122 would also be the same for SSS 7123, SSS 7124, and SSS 7125. We entertain any quick points for the strengths that you noted?
For strengths, there are some very interactive, interesting activities in terms of DBQs, history mysteries, some primary source activities that seem very interesting and engaging, as well as some digital only map activities that looked very interesting and cool for students to play with. That's the positive. Would you like the negative now, or would you like to wait a moment?
Well, you can go ahead and give us the areas of concern. Yes, you can go ahead and give us the areas of
Okay.
concern.
I have a lot of concerns about this one. It did not meet all the criteria, and a lot of that was due to depth of knowledge. When you click on various activities, especially the reading activities, they cover grades 5 through 12. And it seemed like this was aimed more towards a middle school level in the reading. It did not go into enough depth frequently. And there is a lot of activities here, which could be great that teachers could pick and choose, but it is pre-laid out and designed that you do all of their activities all the way through. And would take you an entire year to do, which would be hard in a block schedule like most of our high school classes have. The digital platform itself was very frustrating to use. I had to ask a colleague whose school had bought this before how to use it and kind of make it work. It was not readily apparent, and was very clunky and did not, if you wanted to skip things, it made it very difficult. It felt like, to pick things out. So those are my negatives.
Were there any other comments for SSS 7122?
From an EL perspective, the strengths and my concern are about the same thing, because I did think it was useful that students could highlight a word and possibly receive a dictionary or a Pictionary result. That could be very helpful. However, that was only specific words. Some words did not provide a definition, or no image was found. So my concern is that basically students would have to have questions about very specific words, or they would not be assisted.
Next, we'll look at Savas Learning Company, SVL 7108.
The Savas was interesting. They gave us a actual PDF of the book and things to look at, as well as access to their digital resources. This book is very pretty and very well put together, and some of the infographics in here I would love to be using in my classroom right now. This had something interesting at the beginning of each chapter, or topic as they call them, with some sort of quest inquiry activity. There were different ways to do it, but it was very primary source-based engaging, which fits right along with our standards and the way North Carolina is going with social studies. They also had, at the end of a chapter topic that I found very interesting, something that they call, well, let me get to the official title here, Connections to Today, which really meets that inquiry objective 6 about taking action, and helps them figure out a plan and connect whatever they learned about to today in some way, shape, or form. For example, I'm looking at the Great Depression, and they're talking about the Dust Bowl and how the environment impacted the people and human interaction with the environment, which again meets another standard. But then they tie it to today and ask them to look at either like wildfires, floods, or wetlands, and giving them options to take action. It was one of the few things that I saw in this resource that happened consistently. This is in every topic or chapter, to engage students, which I thought was very interesting, and something that I did not see in other resources. Some of them had that, but nowhere near this frequently. And this is in the book. This wasn't an extra digital resource.
Or
The
would there
digital
be,
resources were a little harder to judge because they did tell us straight up they did not give us the digital platform because we didn't have students. We couldn't quite see the student side of things. But they've got a lot of things on the digital platform that look interesting and that could help teachers. Lots of teacher resources. And then my last thing is they have an app to go on phones or iPads or other devices to make the textbook come alive, which was interesting way to take a physical book and integrate it with technology and just like scan it using the app to take you to a video or to something, which was, I've never seen that before like this.
this is Commissioner Linker. Are there any areas of concern before we move on to the next one?
For EC, the vocabulary was introduced under key concepts and they were highlighted there and within the text. If you clicked on the word, you got the definition, but there really was not a review of the vocabulary or development or reinforcement of vocabulary that I could find. Even though there were speech buttons embedded in the text, they need to be more comprehensive on your captions, illustrations, that kind of thing. And there was no speak, save, record option anywhere in the material. And there were a lot of written items for the students to have to do.
Commissioner Linker, we will now move on to world history. Starting with Cengage CGL 7102. Any strengths that you'd like to highlight?
This is, as with any National Geographic text, is just great with pictures, graphics, and connections to the students in the real world.
Any areas of concern to note?
The global perspectives feature, it only goes so far in addressing the taking informed action objective. The other one is that the world religions coverage is a little bit dated and static. It doesn't have a lived religions approach. And then finally, you know, like with all National Geographic, sometimes they dip into Orientalism, really showing very exotic pictures and stuff like that, which sometimes give students the wrong impression of other groups.
Also for EC, there was not a real active student engagement for the students to be able to get into the material. The wording was very high level and without any kind of text speech buttons. There is no indication that their assessments can be modified in length. And at the current time, the chapter tests are 6 pages long. If there are some speech buttons found in the text, but it reads the entire page, if you pause it and you go back to it, it starts at the beginning over again. And I just didn't feel like it was really user-friendly for our students and for the modification of having to do everything manually. It just was kind of negative.
The next submission we'll look at is Houghton, Mifflin, Harcourt, HMH 7105. Any strength highlights you'd like to tell us about the strengths?
One strength that I would see with that is its integration with Google Classroom. Although I didn't quite see it in action because I don't have Google Classroom, I feel like that many teachers would appreciate that.
Any areas of concern that you would like to highlight?
There's nothing in the text to correlate with taking informed action, which is, I think, one of the real strong standards of civic literacy. So that's problematic. And again, back to the religions coverage, very static. Isolated religions compared to a lived religions approach.
Next, we'll look at the social studies school services. Again, they have several bids that would all be the same comments. The first is SSS 7118. Comments that would be made for SSS 7178 would be true also for SSS 7119, SSS 7120, SSS 7121. Any strengths to highlight?
A strength would be the navigation of the text or the curriculum is pretty straightforward and simple. It has compelling questions and fairly simple lesson planning.
Any areas of concern?
So lack of depth for all the materials. I feel like in a high school classroom, a high school teacher would feel that there was enough depth there for the curriculum. Also, a very Eurocentric view, or at least Western centric. And then there's really a lack of addressing any religious traditions in any robust or deep way.
I agree with what Tim was saying on all those points. It seems to almost be a old school Western Civ type textbook.
To add an additional thought to that, I felt that a lot of the text maybe, while it was kind of did a high level coverage of a lot of things, it lacked a level of depth that we would expect out of high school, and perhaps might be better found in a middle school classroom in terms of the depth that content was explored. And there were several instances in standards where it might be addressed just once throughout the course of the resource with really tenuous connections at other points. And so it seemed like the overarching themes of standards were very specifically relegated to specific times or specific topics.
I felt that at times it was just very difficult to navigate through. Excuse me, my voice is going. Had a hard time kind of maneuvering around it. I thought a lot of the stuff, the activities could have been used for supplemental pieces versus it being a complete, a text set or a text for the classroom. Just the way it was laid out.
The next submission we'll look at is Savas Learning Company SVL 7109. Any highlights for areas of strength that you'd like to share?
Highlights would be the infographics, the quest inquiries, and its integration with Google Classroom, which I think teachers would appreciate, and the interactivity with a lot of the activities themselves.
I like the connections to today. I thought it was very user-friendly in that aspect. It was inviting. The graphics, maps, and so forth were very well laid out and helped reinforce concepts.
I agree with that. I think the supporting documents lend well to the text. Also, I think it flows very well as a teacher looking at it. It kind of moves from one section to the other, but it has some kind of connectedness in the background as it's doing that. So that, you know, you can go from past to almost present in the units.
From an EL perspective,
I thought it was interesting that there was
Cannot they
professional
hear me?
development embedded into the platform, from SEL to culturally responsive to active classroom engagement. That was an interesting perspective there.
And
It
I know
provided for,
yeah, go ahead. I was gonna say, I know someone
I'm
else.
sorry. Yeah, it provided for extra support for students with special needs, lots of differentiated instruction, as well as there were more activities that did not involve written responses. Written responses pose a challenge for students, some students with disabilities, and there were a lot of activities where you can manipulate the things that were online. So that was a plus in terms of EC.
from an EL perspective, this publisher, all of the resources I looked at, they include differentiation for ELs based on proficiency level, which I've never seen before. And it really broke it down based on what that student should be able to do at their language proficiency level, and what kind of, and that gave them ways that they could challenge them, but also meet them where they are. So I found that very helpful for our English language learners.
Any areas of concern to add?
Search is wonky, just very wonky. It's very difficult to find things very quickly in the text itself. And so that goes back to, I think, the accessibility portion of the text itself. It's just very difficult to access things quickly in the textbook.
That concludes our high school courses. We thank you guys for all of your hard work and patience and working through. We have your notes and your specific details and your criteria and standards review to look at as well. And we are going to move on at this time to 6th grade, 7th grade, and then 8th grade social studies. Dr. Fair, we might need. So we're going to start with 6th grade social studies. Give me 1 second to pull up that. The first thing that we'll look at for 6th grade is Cengage Learning Incorporated CGL 7100. Any highlights of strengths that you found?
This is one that, this is the National Geographic format, and it does promote active student engagement.
With that read aloud feature, the narrator uses like a human voice. It's not computerized, and he's very lively, very engaged with his reading. And students are able to press a button to have the text modified when it is read aloud.
There was an accompanying field journal, which promoted students to complete writing activities related to each lesson. And a lot of the prompts made real world connections and personal connections, which would help English language learners link and build background knowledge.
And are there any areas of concern that you would like to highlight for us?
most of the practice that I was able to find was in the form of writing activities, which can be challenging for EC students.
I have a similar concern for ELs. I did not find a lot of speaking activities or ones that were designed specifically for presentation and practicing language in the content. There were discussion questions that could be turned into a speaking activity, but they weren't necessarily designed for that purpose.
Next, we'll look at Exploros Inc.'s submission EXP 7100. Any highlights of strengths that you'd like to share with the commission?
This particular resource had the availability to be used face-to-face or for distance learning. The vocabulary and important information were in blue, and hyperlinks were also provided for additional information.
Any areas of concern you would like to share with the commission?
With this being a digital platform, I did not see a read aloud option for this particular product. So that might pose a problem for students who have difficulty reading, especially on grade level. I did not see very cognitive level options, but there were suggestions for like small group instruction, whole group instruction, and there was a limited variety of exercises or activities. Basically, you read the article, you watched the video, and you answered the questions. And those were written responses.
Next, we'll look at Gibbs Smith Education GSE 7102. Any highlights of strengths?
One of the highlights I noticed for that one was it really supported literacy standards and incorporated the literacy standards with the North Carolina social studies standards also.
Any areas of concern you would like to share with us?
Another strength that I'd like to include was it looked like they specifically targeted what North Carolina standards were, not just the general standards for any other state.
Next, we'll move to Huden Mifflin Harcourt bid submission HMH 7100. Any highlights for strengths?
I like the fact that they included videos embedded in their chapters, and they had partnered with history, and they were really good videos. And then they had an interactive timeline and did a really good job at focusing on primary sources.
Any areas of concern?
The only thing that I wrote was I think that when text is set up online horizontal, like a book would be, it's a little bit easier for kids, especially kids who have issues with motivation and stamina reading. I think it's easier for them, but this one was scrolling. It was scrolling through pages instead of like horizontal that you would digitally turn a page.
Next, we will look at social studies school services. The next several bids would all have the same comments for strengths and areas of concern. So we'll make comments for SSS 7106, knowing that those comments would be the same for SSS 7107, SSS 7108, and SSS 7109. Any areas of strengths you would like to share with the commission?
They do offer supplemental materials at various Lexile levels to support the different ability levels.
There was a nice map resource that was interactive and a lot of information on it.
Any areas of concern you would like to share with the commission?
That there was not much sentence complexity. A lot of the sentences were, or a lot of the paragraphs were very choppy. There were a few misspellings that I saw in the scanning that I did over the chapters. It was not very user-friendly and not very visually motivating to kids who may be dealing with, again, motivation issues and stamina issues, and as well as reading disabilities.
I did note the same as Lena that there was limited photos. It was not visually appealing, and there were limited captions to go with the photos and the graphics.
Next, we will look at Savas Learning Company's submission SVL 7105. Any strengths you would like to share with the commission?
This was a really, excuse me, a really good setup of correlation to standards. It was very easy to see how everything matched up with our standards. There were also downloadable note-taking sheets, good annotation tools.
There was multiple digital resources available, including like MVC Learned, interactive biographies. There was even a 21st century skill section.
Any areas of concern?
For me, it took a while to load pages. It was a little bit hard to use and also a bit confusing, just the navigation in all of it. The pages also were very busy. There was just a lot going on all of them, and it was a little bit hard to keep up with.
And that concludes 6th grade. We will be moving into 7th grade submissions, starting with Cengage Learning Incorporated CGL 7101. Any highlights for strengths for the commission?
National Geographic provides in their resource a real-world approach. It provided DBQs and primary source documents throughout that allowed students to understand the events a little bit more in depth. And they also included graphics, images, maps, and real-world examples, as National Geographic does throughout. And it was age appropriate for the resource.
Everything was read aloud, from the text to captions to the information that was in the margins. Students had the option to modify the text as it was read aloud to them. There were differentiated instruction for striving readers, inclusion, ELL, for students who, if there was too much on the page, they were able to zoom in to enlarge the text to try to limit the information that was on the page. And the text flowed. It was very easy to read. The vocabulary was not too complex for that grade level.
And are there any areas of concern you would like to share?
This resource didn't cover all the standards, and I also found that it lacked a certain level of detail or in-depth looks into these subjects and these topics. And if you're going to spend money on a resource, you would want it to be comprehensive.
Next, we will look at Gibbs Smith Education, GSE 7103. Any strengths you would like to highlight for the commission?
With Gibbs Smith, you could tell, as 6th grade pointed out, that they had definitely focused on North Carolina standards. Within the teaching manual, within the resource, there was definitely evidence of Gibbs Smith focusing on the North Carolina standards and the new inquiry standards throughout the resource.
Any areas of concern? We will move on to Huden, Mifflin, Harcourt, bid HMH 7101. Any areas of any strengths that you'd like to share with the commission?
HMH focused on videos, interactive timeline, primary sources, and just well thought out materials and activities for 7th grade learning styles throughout the resource itself.
It also offered differentiated activities for students, and the online platform was very easy to use. There's read aloud features for the kids, things like that.
Also, having the platform of possibly using it on Google Classroom was also pretty cool to have. You couldn't try it out for yourself with what we had, but I think that would be nice to have, being able to translate that to your classroom.
Any areas of concern that you would like to share with the commission? We'll move on to social studies, school services. Again, the trend continues. We'll take comments about SSS 7110, but those comments would be the same for SSS 7111, SSS 7112, and SSS 7113. Any areas of strength that you would like to share with the commission?
Active Classroom could be used, or SSS could be used as a supplemental resource within the classroom if you are in a technology-based situation.
I think it also gives, I believe it is more just supplemental, but I think it also gives a good mix of some resources for teachers to use. I've seen where it had PDFs you could download for different activities, but then it also had some interactive maps and some things like that that were, it's a little bit of a balance. So it's got both of those spectrums included.
Any areas of concern?
Active Classroom SSS, it's balanced and it's a supplemental, but it's not a standalone. There are activities within it that we could all use immediately within our classroom, but the depth of understanding and knowledge and background within active learning is limited in spots of the resource.
We'll move to Savas Learning Company, SVL 7106. Any strengths you would like to share with the commission?
Once again, this is one that has a lot of resources for active student engagement, from interactive videos, just very bountiful in its resources.
And any areas of concern?
The navigation search bar was a little all over the place. It was kind of difficult to find certain information. And once you look on the page within Savas Learning, there's a lot of information and graphics on the page, which makes it a little bit difficult to understand in parts.
And that concludes our 7th grade submissions. We're going to move on to our 8th grade submissions. We'll start with Exploros Incorporated EXP 7101. Any highlights for strengths that you would like to share with the commission?
Yes, I have some.
Go
I
ahead.
think oop, I'm on the wrong one. I'm sorry. Multiple sources are provided in this resource that allows students to construct claims and counterclaims.
Quiet place real quick.
And they are given ample opportunities to construct responses to supporting and opposing perspectives, which I thought was a real strength. There are included within the resource a variety of formative and summative performance tasks. Two, a real strength of the resource was the opportunity students were given to read about societal challenges and to analyze the causes and effects of those challenges.
Any other areas of strength to share with the commission? Areas of concern that you would like to note?
Okay. Well, for me, bid number XB7101 is an electronic source, and it had a wealth of information. It does a great job of covering national and world history aspects, but it does not do the same from the standpoint of North Carolina history. It appears like the North Carolina information was added at the tail end rather than being like the focal point. So it kind of comes up short in some places. It does a great job of covering the geographic features of the nation, but then it doesn't cover the same amount of information for the North Carolina geographic features. It kind of left out like even just the three regions of North Carolina. It did a great job of highlighting the national founding documents, but then on the North Carolina side, it didn't really discuss the founding documents for North Carolina besides the Mecklenburg Resolve. Overall, it did a great job discussing American history from a historical and factual standpoint. It does not give information from multiple perspectives, as it does not highlight indigenous peoples or other groups of the lesser population of peoples. It did not satisfy many of the NC standards, but overall, it does provide a lot of information.
Mr. McDaniel, can you stop for 1 second? Can you go back a little bit and then repeat what you said? We're trying to keep up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, I think I muted myself. The whole thing or just part of it?
Just after the part about when you talked about it didn't have North Carolina specific.
So I think I was talking about the North Carolina geographic features. So it did a great job with the geographic features of the nation. But for North Carolina, it really didn't go into great detail about our geographic features. It highlighted the founding documents for the national level, but on the North Carolina level, it didn't really discuss anything besides the Mecklenburg Resolve. So that was the only thing I could find. So basically, it does a great job from the American history standpoint. It has a lot of information, but for the North Carolina history, it's kind of like at the tail end of each unit, and it's kind of seemed like it was added on at the tail end, so it wasn't as rich as the American history. So overall, as far as being factual for American history, it was great, but for North Carolina history, it was not as good, and it didn't really offer any other perspectives besides just one perspective. And I wouldn't say not perspectives, it just didn't bring in the other perspectives. So it gave a perspective, it just didn't bring in other perspectives.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, we'll move on to Gibbs Smith Education, GSE 7101. Any strengths you would like to share with the commission?
Oh, well, I kind of have mine written up. So bid number GSE 714 is a traditional textbook, and it has a wealth of information and does a great job of covering national and North Carolina history. It appears the book was written to couple what was happening in the world with what was happening in North Carolina. It additionally does a great job of offering multiple perspectives as it highlights heroes of various groups of indigenous peoples, African Americans, Africans, Europeans, and women. It gives information about the cultures of indigenous peoples and African Americans and the resources that made their lives just as much of the American story as George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. Additionally, it has a plethora of check for understandings after each section and unit reviews. The book does a great job of satisfying all NC standards.
Any areas of concern?
I do have an area of concern. I didn't see the book was called The North Carolina Journey. And so I know that it was discussed from the previous resource that it was American history heavy and light on North Carolina, which I definitely agree with. This one was really North Carolina centric, but it did, as the other advisor was talking about, did a fantastic job of meeting all of the objectives. The one thing that that I did have some concern over was the opportunity to review peer responses. That was the standard was met, in my opinion. The indicator was there, but the students didn't have a lot of opportunities to do that.
Next, we will look at social studies school services. Following the trend we've seen all afternoon, there would be, we will make comments to SSS 7114. Those comments would also be the same for SSS 7115, SSS 7116, and SSS 7117.
I don't have a strength, but I do have a weakness.
Okay.
With regard to the source, I thought there was just such a dearth of information and lack of meaningful, authentic activities in the resource. Students are really using this resource, unable to move past knowledge-based questions and to any kind of higher order thinking activities. I didn't see any evidence of students being able to summarize, to analyze, to evaluate. I noted a few spelling and grammatical errors in the text. The sentence structure was far too simplistic to be a viable resource that will lift students up. The content is absolutely more readable for students, yet it's so shallow as to bore the students to tears. The authors declare within the resource, which I found interesting, and I went back to look to see where this was. It might have been in the teacher materials, and it said, this U.S. history reading program is designed to meet the needs of students who are daunted by the length and complexity of traditional textbooks. And then also within the resource, students are regularly asked, they are told to consult their teachers for more information. And it's up to the student to determine whether or not they need that information.
That would be the end of our 8th grade submissions.
Oh, I was
Oh,
waiting.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mr. McDaniel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was, bid number, SSS 7114 is an electronic source and has a wealth of information, but it's hard to get a true understanding of American North Carolina history because the information seems scattered. It does satisfy many of the North Carolina standards, but the scatterness makes it hard to make connections. As you read, you may find information missing, but later in the unit, the information is presented. It does not provide consistency in its formatting as each page is different. I would have liked to have seen each unit or section provide keywords to make sure the learners focus on key points when learning. Overall, the content presented is informative and it has some good activities to explain learning, but the inconsistency and scatterness makes it hard to use.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So that ends our time with social studies 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And we, the commission, will take a break before we come back.
Commissioner Lincoln.
We're waiting. Yep.
If I may, I just wanted to take a moment to express my appreciation for all of the educators that participated in our 612 social studies textbook evaluation, and thanks for your time and your commitment to ensuring that this commission does and takes the necessary action and knowledge when selecting the appropriate textbooks for our students to use across the state of North Carolina. Thank you again.
Commissioner Lincoln, I concur. Again, thank you for your services. And if your social studies 6-8 or the high school courses, we thank you for your services and you are finished with us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Just stop it. You can't just stop. This is Commissioner Linker. Switching this, look at the schedule. We do have the next group scheduled to be 4 o'clock with social studies, kindergarten, first grade. We need to take a break to go to the bathroom. And we will be back in 10 minutes. This is Commissioner Linker. This is Commissioner Linker. We'll start this afternoon with roll call. Dr. Fair.
Okay. Commissioner Jody Ray Autry,
Commissioner Autry present.
Commissioner Ricky Baldwin,
Commissioner Baldwin present.
Commissioner Marlena Blue,
Commissioner Blue present.
Commissioner Aubrey Gadet, Commissioner Kathleen Linker,
Commissioner Linker present.
Commissioner Lisa Ray,
Commissioner Ray present.
Commissioner Lindsay Sice.
Commissioner Sice present.
Okay, so you have quorum.
So we're getting ready to start our ELD debriefings. Before we start, to kind of explain it, it's a little different the way things are bundled. We're going to go by grade level. And so you would only need to give information if it was a grade level that you looked at. You'll hear the same bid numbers repeated a couple of times because they're in multiple grade levels. But when we're in sixth grade, if you looked at the sixth grade material, then that's when you would comment. When I get to seventh grade, if it's the same number, but you did not review it as seventh grade, then you wouldn't comment on that. So we'll go through all of sixth grade, and then we will go through all of seventh grade, and then we will go through all of eighth grade. We'll start alphanumerical order, starting with the first vendor, which is going to be Cengage, and with the first number that Cengage has. Are there any questions about the debriefing order before we start? Everyone is a panelist, which means you have the ability to mute and unmute yourself. So when you get ready to talk, if you just want to unmute yourself and speak and then mute yourself back, there's quite a few people in the room. And if we're all ready to go, there are no questions, and we'll begin with sixth grade. The first submission is Cengage Learning CGL 4000. Do you have any highlights of strengths you would like to share with the commission for Cengage CGL 4000?
I can share. It was rich in visuals and graphics. The text.
Aaron, hold on one second. We can't hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Can
try
somebody else
again.
say something?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, yes, we sure can. Okay.
Excellent. Okay, just, beautiful, rich text and graphics, complex social studies and science text, and of course, fiction and informational as well. A lack of math standards present. Yeah, and other than that, that's all I have to say.
Does anyone else would like to make comments to the strengths or weaknesses, areas of concern for CGL 4000? Next, we will take comments about CGL 4001. Any comments to strengths?
I'll speak again. Amazing accessibility features and scaffolding that is consistent and varied all throughout the entire course. And of course, a lack of math standards as well. But everything else is covered very explicitly.
Any other comments for CGL 4002? Then we will move on to CGL 4, I'm sorry, that was CGL 4001. We will move on to CGL 4002. Any comments to the strengths?
Unfortunately, CGL 4002 was not available to be previewed.
Any additional comments for CGL 4002? Moving on to CGL 4003.
Yes, many of these curricula had a multitude of moving pieces to them that students would be expected to switch between and among, and that would create transitioning time for the teacher trying to get everyone in the same place. I thought that this program did the best job of integrating all the moving parts and would probably be the easiest one for students to navigate, as well as addressing a fair number of standards. The only ones that they were really weak in were math.
Any additional comments for CGL 4003?
Yeah, there, I agree. It was, it was very hard to flip-flop to the companion site adequately. It was only showing you PDF examples at first, but once I was able to figure out how to get to those areas, the PDF version really shows good pacing, grade appropriate work, different cognitive levels, learning styles, abilities. They're same amount of repetition and concept for using questions to help below level learners. The big problem is that the digital platform, when you went to the demo, was really not up to par. On the reading comprehension activities, there were speech buttons to hear the story, but not to hear the question or answer choices. On the activities, there were no verbal or specific written directions, with the exception of like a fill in the blank. There were click and drags with no instructions, drop down menus. There were matching, but there was one speak save option that I was able to find. But even after the student chooses a word and it fills in the sentence, it doesn't repeat the sentence. Like it's very, there was a lot of disappointment for this one. Let's see if there's anything. It just doesn't help with the listening component of the language acquisition and listening component. It would not be easy for our EL and EC students who do not read and are expected to read and understand without any assistance from the digital platform. So.
Next, we'll talk, sixth grade would be for CGL 4004. Any strengths you would like to share with us? Any areas of concern that you would like to share with the commission?
I believe that was a first grade curriculum, if I'm not mistaken.
This is a bundle. So, yeah, they're going to be different levels all bundled together.
This Commissioner Linker, for clarification, that you're saying that the sixth grade standards were not covered?
I'm EC, so I did not do the standards.
That is correct. Sixth grade standards were not represented in this bundle because the bundle was designed for first grade standards.
Thank you. The next bid submission would be CGL 4005.
This is also a first grade curriculum. that should maybe be reviewed later in the elementary because it's also in the elementary. It's book A only from the bundle.
And any
Commis-
other?
Commissioner Linker,
Yes,
it
ma'am.
looks like the sixth grade would be the 4019 bundle, if that's helpful.
That's a little, the thing is that they bundled it together, K-6 as a whole, so we have to look
Oh.
at it through sixth grade.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Also, so it's a little unusual, but that they chose to bundle it as a K-6, so we need to look at it also through sixth grade. We will look at it through kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, but sixth grade as well. The next bid for comment would be CGL 4006.
That also did not meet sixth grade standards. It could be reviewed later for elementary school and first grade.
The EC comments are pretty much the same for the entire bundle.
So Sally, that would be the comments that you made for CGL 4003, would be the same for all of them.
For all of the, yes, 4004 through, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
CGL 4007 would be the next one that we will discuss. Any areas of strength or concern that you would like to share with the commission?
They do not meet they do not meet sixth grade standards as a third grade curriculum.
If there are no other comments for CGL 4007, we'll move to CGL 4008. No comments for CGL 4008. Let's move on to 4009. CGL 4009. Having no comments for CGL 4009, we'll move on to CGL 4010.
This one did not meet grade level standards either.
Any other comments for CGL 4010? CGL 4011.
It's goes the second set of the 4010, 11, and 12, and those three that one didn't meet the grade level standards either.
Thank you. So the same comment would be also for CGL 4012.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other comments for CGL 4011? Okay, let's move to CGL 4012. Any additional comments for CGL 4012? And moving on to CGL 4013. Any comments for CGL 4013?
Same as all the other comments. This is not a resource for middle school, so it doesn't meet the middle school sixth grade standards.
Moving on to CGL 4014. It's okay to make the same comment for each one if it's a subcomponent. It would just be helpful if you would make the comment for each one.
This one does not meet grade standards. It would be preferred for a lower grade level.
Any other comments for CGL 4014? Moving on to CGL 4015.
It also does not meet the grade level standards. It would be preferred for a lower level.
Any comments for CGL 4016?
Yes, I actually reviewed CGL 4016 through the 6th grade lens. It is a 5th grade curriculum, and it actually does meet many of the 6th grade standards. Once again, it is weak on the math standards, although it had more math standards present than the 6th grade curriculum did. Once again, I thought that it was extremely user-friendly once you've had a chance to work within the program for a while. Great accessibility features, very rich graphics that are engaging, as well as the videos. The technology did not have glitches. And although there was one big issue I thought with accessibility, and that was that there really was no way to access the table of contents, index, glossaries, or word-to-word that were embedded within the book. There really needed to be some sort of a shortcut on a sidebar for those features, as well as the interactive ebook that was hidden all the way under the resources tab. There really needed to be some sort of a shortcut to the interactive ebook from the main contents page where the units were listed. Other than that, had some great features. This was only the student textbook that we were looking at, not the teacher's edition. Therefore, we were not able to evaluate the teacher's edition. But it met on many occasions. As a 5th grade curriculum, it still met the 6th grade standards.
The next submission for discussion would be CGL 4017.
This is going to be the same situation. This is book A only of the 5th grade curriculum. It did not meet as many of the standards because it was only 1/2 of the course. I would say it actually fell short somewhere in around 45% of the 6th grade standards being met. Once again, there were no, or maybe one only, I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull from memory, of the math language standards that were covered in this. The texts were still appropriate for 6th grade. They were just slightly less complex, but still very accessible and appropriate.
CGL 4018.
And yes, this would be from the same bundle. This is book B only of the 5th grade, and it was viewed through the 6th grade lens. It met somewhere around 86% of the 6th grade standards. So it was still highly effective as a 6th grade curriculum, even though it was designed for 5th grade. All of the same wonderful accessibility of features present, still need to have a shortcut and a sidebar to access some of the main features like table of contents and index, glossaries, and interactive ebook.
I found that it was a bit stronger in the literature versus the math and science language required at the 6th grade level. The language arts was the stronger side.
And CGL 4019.
Okay, this was a 6th grade curriculum, truly, and the texts were more complex after looking at the progression. The activities were highly varied, and almost every one of the standards was hit. I think that there once again were maybe 3 of the math standards that were not hit in this book. Strong practices for all the different types of writing genres: narrating, expressive, argue, and also interpretation. Amazing scaffolds built all throughout, using a variety of thinking maps and graphic organizers for almost every single task that the students were asked to do. There were a lot of footnotes built in within these texts as well that have students stop and do checks for understanding, reference to key words and multiple meaning words, figurative language. It's a whole language curriculum that really hits all the components, except for just a few of the math components.
Any other comments for 4019? If not, we will move on to CGL 4020.
This is only book A of the 6A, 6B bundle. It did fall shy in just a few areas in the argue and social studies categories, as well as the math language categories of standards. And it still had all of the same great features that the bundle contained. There was no teacher version in this submission. We were only looking at the student books.
Are there any other comments for CGL 4020? Then we'll move to CGL 4021.
Okay, and this is book B of the bundle. This is where you're going to find most of the argue standards being presented and practiced. It did also hit more of the standards as a standalone resource than book A did. And you could almost use book B by itself as a standalone resource because of the number of standards that were met here. And repetition also of other skills that had already been covered in book A were also cycled back and practiced again in the B version of the book, but with more complexity in the second book. Still needs a shortcut for table of contents and all of that.
Are there any other comments for CGL 4021? So we'll move to Lexia LLS 4000. Any comments of strengths for LLS 4000? We need to have some comments for LLS 4000.
I felt that this would be a good supplemental activity. This was the first thing that I looked at on the first day. And so I think some of the components were not available at that time. But when I looked at it, it seemed to only be listening and speaking. Is that right? Yeah, I think it was just listening and speaking when I was looking at it.
I only started to preview it before I was told to move on to someone else because they had enough eyes on it. But I thought it was very unusual that I kind of felt like the English accent that they were using was a little bit confusing. It should have been maybe a little bit more of an American accent, unless they're trying to market it towards, different countries.
Are there any other comments for LLS 4000? That completes the 6th grade considerations. We'll move on to 7th grade. For 7th grade, we have Cengage Learning CGL 4000. Any highlights of the strengths for CGL 4000? So if you reviewed it as from a 7th grade with the 7th grade criteria and the 7th grade standards, we would appreciate input, comments of strengths or areas of concern with CGL 4000. Moving on to CGL 4001. So I see reviews. If you could just give us like a strength and weakness, your overall impression of a strength or weakness.
I have a question about that. So the rubric for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade is for 6 through 8. So I did not review Lyft, but I'm wondering if people who were assigned to 6th grade would have the same comments for 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, because I think it's supposed to be the same rubric.
The comments could be the same. If they did the reviews, they would have it in their forms. Does that help, Nicholas, answer your question? So
Yeah.
there are submissions for 7th grade. I didn't have the dash after it?
Yes. Commissioner, for that platform it is whatever CGL 4000, and that's for 6 through 8 grade. There's nothing, they're not broken down the way.
That makes sense. All right, so if there's no anything addition to add to CGL 4001, is there anything additional to add to CGL 4002? And any additional comments for CGL 4003? So that would conclude our 7th grade submissions. Moving on to 8th grade. Again, we're looking at from 8th grade, CGL 4000. Strengths and weaknesses for CGL 4000. And moving on to CGL 4001.
Yes, I reviewed that one for the 8th grade level. It was very comprehensive. I think its greatest strength was it offered many more opportunities to practice expressive skills than most of the other books that I reviewed, and across all the different content areas too. I thought it was easy to navigate, but it didn't have a lot of exercises that addressed math standards.
Are there any other additional comments for CGL 4001? Now let's move to CGL 4002.
Hello, I don't believe we had access to this resource. Sorry, did you hear me?
Yeah, I'm sorry, we did, and
Okay.
Commissioner Size concurred.
Okay.
So that would move us to CGL 4003.
I reviewed this book, this program, and for 8th grade, and I believe it met most standards. It was missing the math component. It had language for math, but it did not have opportunities for expression or evaluation or trying out problems or practicing language aside from vocabulary. But otherwise, its strengths were the visuals and relevant content that would engage the students. I think it would work for 8th graders as well as many other age groups in the middle grades. And that the topics would really draw students in and then get them to practice expressive language in many different ways, authentically, because they would be interested in the topics.
Thank you. That our 8th grade bid submissions. So this time we have finished our 6th through 8th grade band. We thank you for your time. I think that you have directions to go back to the K-5 room and as you're working on some other things at this time. We appreciate your work and look forward to listening to your comments tomorrow when we conclude with K-5. So if I'm going to log off from this WebEx, take you like 15-minute break and then log back into the other one and continue working on what you've been working on in the K-5 room. Thank you very much. And the commission will be on a break till 3:20. So we've got about an 11-minute break until social studies, kindergarten first, and then we'll be here at 3:20. So we're going to take a break from now to 3:20. We'll be back at 3:20. Commissioner, this is Commissioner Linker. We're back, and we're going to start with roll call.
Commissioner Jody Ray Autry,
Commissioner Autry present.
Commissioner Ricky Baldwin,
Commissioner Baldwin present.
Commissioner Marlena Blue,
Commissioner Blue present.
Commissioner Aubrey Gadet,
Commissioner Cadet present.
Commissioner Kathleen Linker,
Commissioner Linker present.
Commissioner Alicia Ray,
Commissioner Ray present.
and Commissioner Lindsay Sice.
Present.
Okay, so quorum.
So we'd like to welcome our social studies kindergarten and first grade advisors with us. We're going to start with kindergarten, and so we'll go through the kindergarten submissions, and then we'll go to first grade and go through the first grade submissions. I will say the number, and then we will take comments for weaknesses, for strengths, and areas of concern. So let's start with, the first one for kindergarten would be Inquire Ed, INQ 7100. Do we have any highlights for the strength of INQ 7100?
I will say for EL students that there was videos that were available in both Spanish.
This is Commissioner Linker. You are all been made panelists, so you should be able to unmute and mute yourself.
They can, it's ours. We just don't have our speaker.
The light's on.
No, our mic is on, but our speakers are not. Although we can hear.
No, there they go.
There, it's on. That's
Can
just.
you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. I'm Ray Foster. I'm EL. A strength was there's videos that are available in both English and Spanish. And there's handouts that can also be translated. And there's multiple ways for the students to present information. They can speak, collaborate, listen, present. So it covers the four language components.
Would there be any other comments for strengths? And do we have any areas of concern?
It's Kim Chaikin. I had 75% of the standards that were met. KE 1.2, KG 1.1, KG 1.2, KG 1.3, KG 2.1 and 2 were also not met when I did it. The standards were not North Carolina specific, they were more general.
I'll expand on that a little bit. This is Missy Tatum. It also referred us to other grade levels where the standards were covered, but we're not guaranteed to have those materials in different grade levels, so that would basically be impossible to do. And then I saw where a lot of the things only addressed the classroom and community aspects of the standards, but it did not expand them past the community to the global world so that they could compare.
And also there was no maps or globes for the students to use when they were learning about maps and globes was another thing. The vocabulary cards were in black and white, and they used Epic Books, which you have to log into to use.
If there are no other comments on INQ 7100, we will move to Social Studies School Service, SSS 7100. Any highlights of strengths?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It uses the inquiry arc framework, so it covered a lot of the inquiry standards. It went from a concrete understanding for the children of self to a more abstract of the world, and it promoted the use of DOK to help with critical thinking.
To add on to that, the student books was mostly comic strip character pictures with diverse people, and many of cultures were highlighted. And also another thing that was a positive is it built on positive relationships with others without bias for social emotional skills.
From an EL perspective, it has leveled readers, which helps students of different abilities. It covers the 4 language domains. It does a good job of preloading vocabulary and highlighting both new and review vocabulary. And it has many opportunities for group work.
Do we have any areas of concern to highlight?
Again, from an EL perspective, for as far as in the teacher's guides, it's a one size fits all EL approach for differentiation. It doesn't appear that you can translate any of the resources that are supposed to be sent home. That many of the EL things are listed as being EL/below grade level.
And then on the digital content, some of the content could be read aloud, but all of the content did not have that option. So it wouldn't be something that could be done independently.
If there are no other comments for SSS 7100, we will move on to Savas Learning Company SBL 7100. Any highlights of strengths?
A strength from the EL perspective is it has, it lists for the ELs, it lists all 5 of the WIDA access levels. The entering, emerging, developing, expanding, and bridging gives the teacher activities for every one of those levels on the different lessons. The glossary is in English and Spanish. It covers the 4 language domains and it highlights vocabulary.
One of the things that would be a plus is it has show distance learning. It has a switch you can switch on and off for distance learning if you need to if we have to go remote learning with children.
And it also used different modalities for the students to show their understanding of their work.
Are there any areas of concern that you would like to share?
They did have a celebrate your state in it, but North Carolina was not highlighted or included in that.
It to me, it seemed more nationally motivated than state by state motivated. So there was very little talk about self or community. The other concern I had was the ease of use of especially the digital platform. It did not seem very easily used to me. And I'm a technology person. I don't think that it would be easily used for children.
If there are no other comments for SBL 7100, we'll move on to Studies Weekly, SWK 7100. Do we have any comments for strengths?
At the end of each lesson, it asks a question to get you ready for the next lesson. So it's front loading students. The articles were easy to understand for the students and they were broken down into smaller bits and pieces of information that the information could be built upon.
Are there any areas of concern?
From an EL perspective, there was no EL support listed.
There are no other comments for SWK 7100. We're going to move to first grade. And
Commissioner Linker, this is Commissioner Ray. We may need to make some of the attendees panelists again. Correct. Oh, no.
There and there.
Okay. All right. So this is, let me see if I have my first grade folks on. Okay, Shay, Jenny's coming, Lisa, Casey. Okay, we're good. Sorry.
So start, okay.
Yes, sorry.
So INQ 7101, Inquire Ed. We take highlights for strengths that you have noticed.
In that resource, they had PowerPoints that were relevant to the material. They had songs and they had handouts that you could print out for students to complete, which was a strength.
To piggyback on that, there was also vocabulary cards And then with the videos, there was great engagement opportunities.
And to piggyback on that, for EL students, the videos for the ELs who speak Spanish were able to be translated, and the handouts could also be translated into Spanish, but not into other languages.
Any areas of concern you would like to share with the commission?
There were some standards not covered, B12, B14, and E1.
Constantly going back and forth from modules to lessons. It would have a lesson for something, and then it would say, you know, click here to view the module. So there was a lot of back and forth, and it was only digital. There was no textbook where students could have that hands-on experience.
And once again, a lot of the books were on Epic.
There are no other comments for NQ 7101. We'll move to Social Studies School Services, SSS 7101. Any strengths you would like to note?
It met the standards, pictures, and it had the diverse characters for the students to see.
Casey, can you speak a little louder?
I'm sorry. It met the standards. It had good pictures, and they had diverse characters in the comics for the children to see.
It also had leveled readers.
And from the EL perspective, it gave concrete examples to the teacher of things that the ELs would need, and it covers the 4 domains of language.
I had that as well, and also a plus of being able, there was things translated into Spanish if available.
Can we make Jenny a presenter?
Who is that?
Jenny is, we have a panelist. It needs to be, we have an attendee that needs to be made a panelist, or me. Jenny, yeah.
Do you need Nadia made a panelist as well while I'm
Nadia,
here?
is Nadia first grade? Nadia second grade. It's okay.
I didn't make her panelist. Did you make her panelist? Do you want her out?
Do we have any areas of concern for SSS 7101?
To me, going through the review, it was unorganized and very hard to navigate. The topics were not grouped accordingly. They might have something about culture in chapter 2, and then the other part of that is in chapter 7. It was really a lot of digging to find the different standards. Although it met the standards, it didn't flow properly. And also at the end, in the textbook itself, they did have student handouts and student activities, but in the textbook at the end of each lesson, they didn't have the questions where students could write in the books or activities to ask them to highlight things, underline, or circle things.
To piggyback off of that, I noted that it would be very hard because of those reasons for a non-veteran teacher to really follow it, because it was very, you had to go to different chapters for different things that didn't flow well.
If there aren't any more comments for SSS 7101, we will move on to Savas Learning Company SVL 7101. Any strengths you would like to highlight?
I thought this was a great resource. It was interactive, it was kid-friendly. They had videos, songs, and games that went along with it. At the beginning of each chapter, it had unlocked the big question, where they had to kind of think about that question as they were going through each lesson. They had good vocabulary. They also had online quizzes and master progress, where the teachers could see who has turned in or submitted, you know, what assignment, And they had quest lessons, which expanded it from expanded the lesson from just the text.
It also had the level reading books. It had distant learning, and it had different ways to show your work. And going back for the quest, they had after the quest, the children got different ways to show their opinions on about the quest and the lesson in itself.
And then from an EL perspective, it addressed all 5 of the access levels of an EL learner, which would be very beneficial to someone who was unfamiliar with having EL students in their classroom. And it also covered all 4 of the language domains.
It had a strong digital component that aids in the instructional strategy. All of the graphics were diverse and culturally relevant so that students saw multiple perspectives at a very accurate level.
Are there any areas of concern?
The standards did not explicitly align to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. It didn't teach the inquiry process as strong as it could have. There was a lack of primary sources.
And some of the vocabulary did not match the North Carolina standard vocabulary.
There are no other comments for SVL 7101. We'll move on to Studies Weekly, SWK 7101. Any strengths you would like to highlight for the commission?
This resource was very well organized. Everything was together in the chapters for everything that you needed for the standard. It was kid-friendly. It was interactive. It had videos of this guy and a dinosaur that the kids would that would be engaging for the kids. Had writing activities with each chapter. And then again, immediate feedback. It had multiple choice questions that would let them know if they were right or wrong. And then for the online quizzes, it would score it and let the teacher know how they did, what they missed, and what could be done to reteach that.
It also had.
Go ahead.
It also had on the digital part of it had read aloud where the children could press the button and then read what it says to them. It had videos for each lesson, and it also had the vocabulary on that digital piece with videos that they can click on to get a better understanding of the vocabulary and that lesson in itself.
And I was just going to piggyback on what you both have just said about the length of the text was appropriate for the grade level. And again, some great illustrations and very colorful for the kids.
I was going to echo those comments, as well as saying how well it aligns to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. It flows very well for sequencing for conceptual-based learning, and then it also has a strong cultural relevancy and representation.
Are there any areas of concern you would like to note?
The only area of concern that I saw was they didn't talk about opinions. They talked about facts and fiction, but it didn't go into detail about opinions, facts and opinions.
While it had some primary sources, they were very limited as to a picture of what a primary source was, or it told what a primary source was, but didn't really have deep examples because it was a little bit limited in that kind of content. So one standard IB 1.1 and 1.2 were a little bit weaker.
If there are no other comments for SWK 7101, we have concluded the first grade social studies bid submissions. On behalf of the commission, we'd like to thank you for all of your hard work over the last week. And we do have your more specific and detailed information in the platform like we've talked about during the week. So thank you for being our experts, our ones that are in the field, on the ground, and we appreciate your work and dedication.
Commissioner Ray, I'd just like to say real quick that I really enjoyed working with this kindergarten and first grade group. They have been rock stars who have navigated through lots of bids and lots of resources, and I'm just so appreciative of each one of them. I know that several are actually reviewing other coursework for us as well, so they have really taken on quite a bit, and I'm proud to have been able to serve them.
Thank you, Alicia, for being a great leader.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you are fantastic.
Thank you.
And so with that, if you have, we have to get rid. We have about an hour left. So if you are continuing to work on something and you want to go back in, like finish your thought where you were when you stopped to come back out here, we're going to adjourn our meeting shortly, and then we'll come in and check and give directions for what tomorrow looks like. So thank you. As for the commission, do we have anything to discuss, talk about before we adjourn? If not, we can have a motion to adjourn. We will firm up the schedule for tomorrow so that we can share it out for the ELD folks that are still working hard. We already have the schedule for social studies. So there's no discussion, no questions. We could entertain a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Baldwin, motion to adjourn. Commissioner Blue, second.
Commissioner Baldwin made a motion to adjourn. Commissioner Blue seconded. Dr. Fair?
Commissioner Jody Ray Autry,
Commissioner Autry approved.
Commissioner Ricky Baldwin,
Commissioner Baldwin approved.
Commissioner Marlena Blue,
Commissioner Blue approves.
Commissioner Aubrey Gadet,
Commissioner Bidette approves.
Commissioner Kathleen Linker,
Commissioner Linker approves.
Commissioner Lisa Ray,
Commissioner Ray approves.
and Commissioner Lindsay Size.
Commissioner Sice approves.
All of those present approve.
That's the adjournment till tomorrow morning.